You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, please let me see your ticket stubs for the double-edged double bill. This week, Tilda Swinton gives an Okja to Constantine. Each week, Adam Thomas and Thomas Mariani come to the table to discuss the randomly selected yin and yang of a double feature. Then, both will have to pick a number between 1 and 10 in order to seal their fates for the next episode. One will have 2 good movies, the other 2 bad ones. Let the chaos begin. And I am Adam Thomas.
And I am Thomas Mariani. And welcome to the Double-Edged Double Bill, everybody. We have a special guest with us this particular week. She is a writer. She also is a content editor over at Film Cred, where I've written a few things, and she's a lovely cosplayer as well. If you see any of her socials, is Miss Jessica Scott. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Happy to have you on. We're very curious to hear your thoughts here as we talk about this week. We had this out to the patrons, patreon.com/GEDBpod. We'll talk about that a bit further down the line. But they ended up voting between 2 actresses. It was between Natalie Portman and then the ultimate winner, which was Tilda Swinton. They're an actress we've been wanting to do for quite a while. And Jessica, we put this to you when it was just that competition, no official winner announced. But are you happy with the result of Miss Swinton?
I was secretly rooting for Tilda Swinton. I would have been happy either way, but I was happy with the result.
Well, why exactly are you so happy about Miss Swinton? What really makes you such a fan of her as an actress?
To be honest, this is going to sound silly and reductive, but she's just very strange. She is a strange person. She chooses interesting roles, and she's never the same person in any movie. Obviously, that's the goal for most actors, but she is such a chameleon because she's such a compelling and odd person that I'm always fascinated. Even when I am not a fan of the movie that she's in, I'm always a fan of her in the movie.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's what's so interesting about Swinton is she is really, you mentioned the chameleon thing, which is a common sort of like praise that you can give to an actor. But with Swinton, it's just like, it's so natural, and it is so, I agree, just of her own. Like, I was watching just as like a lark, because we're doing this, the Pedro Almodovar short film, The Human Voice, that came out recently. It's a 30-minute short that is just Tilda Swinton doing like a big monologue basically on a set, and that sounds like it could just be really dull, but it's incredibly compelling because she is just that talented a performer, I would say.
Exactly.
Where would you say you sort of like first glommed onto her? What was the role that made you take notice, like, oh, she's very interesting?
Honestly, and preparing for this, I have not seen a lot of her films. That's such a strange thing to say. Like, I'm kind of just a fan of her presence. So whenever I see her in a movie, like I gravitate towards her movies, but I haven't seen her entire filmography. I had not seen either of these films before. There are several others of hers that I've not seen, but something about her presence as the real Tilda Swinton, if in fact we can ever truly know the real Tilda Swinton, is just so compelling to me. Feels like she is always performing and never performing at the same time. So I kind of became aware of her just, out and about being herself, doing press, and then every film I've seen her in, it's kind of this weird tension between the integrity of being the same person in every movie and the mystique of never being the same person from one second to the next in her entire life. So her as a person I find fascinating.
Yeah, that's true. I especially remember recently when the French Dispatch premiered at Cannes, and they had the whole lineup of like everybody, like Timothée Chalamet in the t-shirt and Bill Murray in the Hawaiian shirt, and she was in that awesome like blue suit, that like teal blue suit that just immediately stuck out. It's just like, oh, you're immediately the only one who knows how to dress, basically, in this lineup.
Yeah, exactly. And it spawned a million memes, but she was always the coolest one in the picture, regardless of however your meme format ended up.
True. But Adam, what about you? Are you a fan, and where did that kind of start for you with Swinton?
Oh yeah, dude, she's fucking badass, man. Like she's one of my favorite working actresses today. I can't agree more with everything that's already been said. It's just there's something about her when she's on screen, you're glued to her. It's even in her sort of muted performances, it's still electric. It's something about the way she carries her eyes, or even the way she purses her mouth sometimes, and it's just she's always doing something when really doing the minimal stuff, and it's just really fascinating to see. That's what makes not only a good actor but also a good character actor, and she just hits it all in spades. First time I saw her, man, at least that I can recollect, it's probably either the choice for the bad film tonight, or it was even maybe Narnia. I'm not 100% on that, but I know once I saw her, I was just so fascinated that I sort of just watched anything I could get with her in it.
It was definitely the Narnia movie for me. That first one, which, to be fair, we might talk about that a bit in the future. Put a bit of a pin in that later in the episode. But I think with that role in particular as like the White Witch, it was to me like the most captivating thing about that movie was the way that she was able to be like this witch who was able to seduce like these kids into this evil realm of things. At least the one kid with Turkish Delight, like how she's able to convince that kid with one of the most overrated candies of all time possible. If you've ever had Turkish Delight, you wouldn't sell your family out for that.
No, it's shit. Yeah. Give me a fucking Kit Kat bar. Or fucking one of them new Reese's with pretzels in it. Get the fuck out. My whole family could go fuck themselves. Give me that Reese cup. Yeah, Turkish Delight is garbage. No offense to fans of Turkish Delight who might be listening, but find a new snack.
It's our biggest audience like thing. It's like all the Turkish Delight fans. They're gonna turn on us.
Turkish Delight Twitter will be at your throats.
Oh, the worst Twitter of all, the worst subsect. But yeah, so we're covering Tilda Swinton today, which we picked our movies at the end of the last episode. In case you are unaware, Adam and I every week end up with 2 good choices, 2 bad choices, and we end up getting one particular good and bad movie for the resulting episode. So our picks ended up being the good one was Adam's, which ended up being Okja, and the bad one ended up being Constantine, which was my choice. Though we'll get into maybe why the line between good and bad might be a bit more thin with a Constantine. But first, we're going to talk about Okja.
We needed a miracle, and then we got one. This beautiful and special little creature will be a revolution in the livestock industry. Our super pigs will not only be big and beautiful, they will also leave a minimal footprint on the environment, consume less feed, and produce less excretions. And most importantly, they need to taste fucking good. Each night before you go to bed, my baby.
Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for the one, the only.
This is dedicated to the one I love. This is dedicated to the one I love. This is dedicated.
So Okja came out June 28th, 2017, from director Bong himself, Bong Joon-ho, who recently was very acclaimed for Parasite, which won a bunch of Oscars. And this was the movie he did right before, but he's done plenty of like interesting films in his native South Korea, and also even some co-productions like this one, or Snowpiercer, the movie he did even before this, but like The Host and all this other stuff. Great director. And Okja was this interesting experiment where he decided to make a movie for Netflix back when that was a bit more of a risk, instead of something everybody does and kind of tosses it off, and then it's one of 80 movies that comes out on Netflix like any given fucking week. But with Okja, I remember it being very sort of controversial because it premiered at Cannes, and it ended up being booed at the time. It was like that one and the Meyerowitz Stories, the Noah Baumbach movie, were both like very contentious because it's like, oh, it's this great huge film festival and a streaming giant is trying to interlope in with us here. But admittingly, this is one of the more weird and ambitious Netflix movies, I would say. It's definitely an example of them courting an acclaimed director to make whatever the fuck they wanted. And Okja, I would argue, is pretty much that. Would you agree, just having just seen it for the first time?
Yeah, absolutely. I was kind of surprised that this was a Netflix movie. Yeah, I'm with you that it was a little weirder, a little darker, certainly, than I would have expected. I obviously wouldn't have booed it, but I will admit to struggling a great deal with the movie because sad animal movies, as I call them, I struggle with those mightily. So this one I had difficulty with, not because it was a bad movie, just because it was very intense emotionally for me. But God, the cast is amazing. Like so many people that I am really, really obsessed with were in this cast. I've never seen weird Jake Gyllenhaal before, so seeing flashes of that in this movie, I'm kind of in the cult of Gyllenhaal as well now. Like I'd seen a few of his films that I never thought of as being particularly weird, and in this one where he kind of becomes his own version of Swinton, where he's just being as bizarre as he wants to be. I get it now. So I appreciated it for that reason, and for seeing Tilda in a different light, as is always the case with her movies. But yeah, I did. This one was hard for me to watch. I won't lie to you.
Well, I get that, especially it speaks to the title character's adorableness despite being a fictional creature. But I want to circle back to the Jake Gyllenhaal Tilda Swinton sort of comparison here. Well, I think the big difference is like Tilda Swinton feels like a character from like The Dark Crystal or any kind of like really artistic Jim Henson production, versus Jake Gyllenhaal's a fucking Muppet in this movie. He is a full-on fucking Muppet in the best way. That is not, if you know me, that is not an insult by any extent.
Yeah, that's a way to put it.
But Adam, how about you? I know you hadn't seen Okja either. What did you end up thinking of this on your first attempt at seeing it?
This movie took a dark ass turn, man. Like in the very beginning, I'm like, oh, this fucking thing is so cute. Oh, the little girl, and her grandfather, and oh, I love this. What's Jake Gyllenhaal doing here? Oh, he's being so wacky, looking in a fridge with shoes. Like, this is crazy. And then once it sort of did the turn, obviously the logical turn, like I knew it was going to go there, but I didn't expect it to have as much weight to it as it did. And I mean, I was a little fucked up after watching this movie too, man. Like, I really, really dug it quite a bit. But afterwards, it made me like kind of wonder what Jack Links is doing with Sasquatch. Like, what is happening here? Like, no, it bummed me out too, man. Like, I really enjoyed it. The acting performances across the board are pretty great, and I also was very surprised with actors that popped up in here in various roles. It was really impressive. Lily Collins, Paul Dano, Stephen Yeun, especially. I'm like, what the fuck? They're in this? I've never seen anything like it. I can honestly say that. I've never seen a movie quite like this. And for that, I got a little bit of enjoyment as well, because at least it's, not sort of a cliche, stereotypical movie.
I don't know. All these Hollywood super pig movies that come out, the Pig See You.
There's a lot of them.
It's ridiculous.
No, there's a lot of
believe
them.
It.
There's a ton of super pig movies. There is a lot of them. But yeah, I really, really loved it. And Gyllenhaal, man, holy shit. Like, the second he came on screen, he's doing the high-pitched voice, like, someone give me some water! and then it'd go on, welcome to Mysteries of the Animal Kingdom. I'm like, yeah, this fucking guy. I am so far in the cult of Gyllenhaal now, too. Like, I was already halfway in there. But now I'm like, this shit. It started with the John Mulaney sack lunch thing where he's the musical guy. And then this was just booted me right in the ass, right into the cult. Like, I went out and bought a pair of black Reeboks and shaved my head. Like, it's just, it's quite a spellbinding performance by him. And Tilda Swinton is really good in it too, sort of playing the dual roles. I like her in it, but it's not unlike other performances I've seen her give, at least the character type. Like, I'd argue there is a lot of Snowpiercer in here. Obviously, same director, so maybe that's kind of what he wants from her. But it's still Tilda Swinton, so of course it's still a great performance.
I mean, I would say that especially of like the second role, the sort of major one she plays, because she plays the two sisters.
Yeah.
The other one she plays, I would say, is pretty distinct from a lot of her other parts, because she's playing like basically this corporate head who wants to be both like CEO and the big sort of like sponsor mascot of the whole thing. And I like that kind of like her tugging at both ends where it's like, oh, I'm trying to be extremely commercial, but also in my heart, I'm like Tilda Swinton and her most like cruel and monstrous, which I love that kind of thing. As opposed to the other part is I agree a lot like sort of her Snowpiercer part, but also she does not give a single shit about like, yeah, I have no empathy or soul. I do not care, which I think is a great contrast between those two parts.
It was really cool. Like the one was kind of bubblegummy, you know, had braces on and stuff. And even though she was a horrible person, just still wanted to be, you know, well liked by everyone and do better than her father and do better than her sister. And then, yeah, when she comes in as a sister, I mean, she is just fucking heartless and cold blooded. And I mean, to a T. The two performances couldn't be any different from each other. I'll give it that for sure.
To the point where they do share the one like frame together, and it's so seamlessly like separating the two. It just feels like, oh no, these are two different actresses. Like it feels like there's no real similarity beyond vague look really between the two of them.
Yeah, it's like a Dead Ringers moment with Jeremy Irons.
Yes.
Like, yeah, like completely, like these are completely different people. These are not the same actor. It's just night and day. Yeah.
Well, and plus also Swinton was like a big producer on this. She was really behind it, I think, having worked with Bong Joon-ho on the Snowpiercer movie. She definitely wanted to, I think, really have him embrace his vision, which I give a lot of credit to, especially because she introduces the whole movie. Like, right off the start, she kind of gives you the tonal sort of complexity of the movie right off the bat. And I think that's definitely this is interesting because it's like very much playing on like modern corporate culture and sort of the image, especially like an eco-friendly company that produces food and all this other stuff. But I think like her sort of intro is really crucial to having the rest of the film play out as it does, because there's this like veneer of a sweet, joyful little movie that has so much undertones of like dark satire that I agree are kind of hit or miss for me at a certain point. But she still, I think, does the best job of kind of like bring you into the weird world of Okja right from minute one.
Yeah, 100%. When you've got these adorable, like animated, you know, corporate commercial trying to get people to buy into this idea, and like you said, the braces, and she's aiming for this kind of girlish charm, but she ends her speech with, yeah, and I hope these super pigs are fucking delicious. Like that is just such a punch to the gut where you're like, oh, that's what this movie's about.
Right, yeah, especially as like things go along, and right after that we're introduced to the titular super pig, because basically if you're unaware of this movie, the plot is mainly centered around like these super pigs that were initially introduced as like, oh, we just found one in Chile and we decided to like breed a bunch of them, and we're having a pig contest where after a 10-year point, we're going to pick one particular super pig to be our sort of mascot for our company. And one of them goes to South Korea and is named Okja by, sorry if I mispronounce either of these names, but there's the grandfather, Bong, played by Byun Bong, and then also An Seo-hyun plays Miha, who is, I love the relationship between her and Okja. I think is so adorable. I think you really like get so invested in the two of them as you see them like playing around. Also, you get the sense that Okja is like an intelligent creature with the way she tries to save Mia and all this other stuff. I think it's a great way to introduce this movie in a way that feels like it's drawing on maybe like some like Girl and Her Pet kind of movies that we've seen before, but still feels at the same time so wholly unique, especially with the effects look so seamless. It's been 5 years since this came out, but it still feels like just Okja's a real creature right in front of me.
Yeah, absolutely, which is part of why this movie is so, like, this is a good movie that I hate, just because it kind of destroyed me so much. But yeah, like, it's so cute. Like, it's diabolically cute in how they relate to each other, the way Okja's eyes move when Mija, you know, whispers in her ear, you know, all those little character moments, like you mentioned, you know, a girl and her dog or a girl and her pet or whatever, films like that we're used to seeing, you know, all those little character moments as we're getting to know and love both of these characters. And then pretty much everyone else is the villain of the piece, because anyone who's not legitimately trying to get these two together again, happy on the mountain, is, you know, I'm actively rooting against them. I hate to be reductive, but movies like this kind of bring that out in me a bit, I'm afraid.
Well, no, I mean, I get that. I think that's definitely the most consistent through line throughout the whole movie, is these are the only two pure souls possible, is Mia and Okja. Which I think, like, it leads to some interesting stuff later, where I think the first half of this movie is pretty stellar, when I think it's much more of like a weird gonzo satiric comedy. at play. I think pretty much everything from the start all the way until like Okja's like escape sequence, which I love. I love all that stuff where like she's trying to escape and the ALF is like chasing after him at the same time that like the corporate car is. I think that's such a stellar sequence. And I think after that the movie kind of starts falling apart for me. It still is interesting and I still particularly believe that friendship between those two, but I loved this the first time I saw it, and revisiting it, I do kind of feel like once the ALF take a larger role in the movie, it feels like it's a bit more satirically all over the place. Would you maybe agree with that, Adam?
That's what I was trying to, kind of saying earlier. It does take such a real big turn, man. You got to figure once after the initial sort of ALF chase scene, which is really well done and it's really cool and it's really, exciting and funny too. But then once it sort of gets into what ultimately they're doing to Okja and sort of the bit with Paul Dano and Stephen Yoon and everything, it's just like it's such a tonal shift where I almost got a little bit of whiplash from it, a little bit of tonal whiplash. I wouldn't say it's bad or anything like that. I still think it's very solid, but it just feels almost like two different movies.
And I had, internal questions as the movie started, just because, as we said, it sets up so many different tones and so many things that it clearly wants to do. I was curious to see how cohesive or coherent it would be. And, a movie doesn't have to be tonally cohesive necessarily to be good or to be entertaining. But yeah, it feels like there's a lot that it wants to talk about and a lot that it wants to accomplish that it didn't quite hit everything the way I would like, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, there's definitely like no lack of ambition here. I think that's the thing with even any of Bong Joon-ho's movies is I think all of them have a kind of like midway tonal shift that really works. Like The Host, even I would say, goes from like full on monster movie to like a very like almost like traumatic horror event movie that like sort of happens at the midway point of it. I think that's what's fascinating about that guy is that he's able to do these kind of things. Or even Parasite has that, I would argue. Like initially it's kind of like a bit more like satiric comedy and then it goes full on into like a Coen Brothers style thriller after a certain point once they're in the house and everything. I think it's just that with an Okja it almost feels like there's a bit of like a I'm lost in translation kind of thing where especially with like his co-writer on this is John Ronson, who is like a satiric writer that wrote stuff like The Men Who Stare at Goats, some other like kind of like wilder crazy kind of stuff that I think their styles clash at points. I think particularly, like I mentioned, the ALF stuff, it feels like at that point when it's just this, like we mentioned, like, oh, everybody, like, not just the corporate side of things, but even the scroungy rebels are also kind of, like, incompetent and don't have any clear alliances whatsoever. It just kind of feels like it's this weird, cynical turn for, like, the second hour of the movie that doesn't quite know which, like, direction we're gonna go. And it's still, like, aside from the consistent thing of, like, Okja and Mia are purely real and have no kind of, like, qualms about, like, what they want to do, everyone else is just like, oh, it's kind of fucking all bad. It doesn't matter. You got your pig. You get to go back home. Like, that's it. It's just this weird kind of, like, nihilistic shrug that I both respect and am still just kind of like, oh, that's what this was about.
And I'm glad that you would mention The Host, but if I did not know who had directed this film, I still would have said this has to be from the guy who made The Host, because I feel like there's so many, narratively speaking, thematically speaking, there's so many similarities there. With this tragedy surrounding this, girl on the run or girl who's lost or been captured, and how it, like you said, it goes from kind of a standard monster movie to being just utterly devastating, like this depressing, heartbreaking movie. And I feel like that's kind of the movie that Bong Joon-ho wanted to make, and as you say, maybe at odds a tad with his co-writer in that. But yeah, it was like The Host Super Pig, the sequel to me in a lot of ways, at least at first.
See, now I haven't seen The Host in fuck, man. It's been a long time, but I can absolutely, just hearing you describe it like that, see that like 100%. I don't think I would ever watch this again. Like, I did like it quite a bit, but it's brutal, man. And and like you said, I love that, Miha and Okja get to go back and, they even got the little piglet with them, which is incredibly cute. Like, fuck out of here with that thing. That is amazing. But then the whole time I'm like, oh, cool. Oh, the piglet. Oh, how'd they get the piglet? Oh, yeah, wait. That's why they have
Yeah,
the piglet.
yeah.
Right.
Oh, fuck. And it's just, and the fact that, I mean, and the thing is, I understand they want to show sort of the brutality of what happens to livestock in slaughterhouses and things like that. Like, I totally understand the point of it and what they're going to do. But I know those things happen. I understand it's important to get that stuff out. But they really went to levels with this that I was not expecting them to go. Especially, well, the mating scene, awful.
Yeah.
Awful. It's a rape scene. Then the little girl in the slaughterhouse and seeing all the cadavers and then the different parts and them getting packaged and everything. And then you get the bolt gun scene. And I'm like, oh my God, okay, fuck, this is relentless. And again, I'm sure that's the point. I completely understand that, but it just comes as maybe a little bit harder to take, only in the fact that A, you're kind of seeing it through a child's eyes, and B, you spent the first sort of 30 or 40 minutes just watching this kid and this pig play and have a relationship and all that stuff. So then when you get to that part, it's just so like jarring and brutal that it affected me not in the way that I would have hoped this movie would have. Still, I'm not saying it's a bad thing to be disturbed by a movie. Sometimes that's the point of the movie, and I do think that was the point of this. But it turned me off to the point where I couldn't watch this again, and I would be very, very sort of selective of who I would recommend this to 100%.
Like, you actually told me at a certain point, like when you were about to watch it, like, oh, hey, I have my daughter. Is this kid friendly? I'm like, the first half kind of is.
That would have been a mistake.
Like, if you stopped at the ALF thing, it's like, and then they went home and they're happy. That's it. That's the whole movie, honey. It's only an hour long. Maybe.
Yeah, that would have been really bad. I'm really glad I asked you first, because that would have been our Friday night, and I would have had a really rough Saturday.
You would have been paying therapy bills for the next, I don't know how old your daughter is, but however long.
5. It'd be like if the chef succeeded in The Little Mermaid. It killed Sebastian. Oh, man, that's the way it goes, honey. Like, oh, boy.
Well, and I think what the bigger problem for me is why I think, say, like a Parasite or The Host or even Snowpiercer, his other, like, English language for the most part film, I think where those movies kind of succeed, where this one kind of stumbles a bit, is the turn doesn't feel like it's as naturally transitioned as it does in any of those other movies. It feels a bit more imbalanced from the first half to the second half, with particularly, I think the moment where Stephen Yeun intentionally mistranslates is really the moment where it kind of like starts falling on its face a bit in terms of satiric stuff. And it becomes a lot more of just like, oh, everyone's a bumbling idiot except for our main characters, which, like I said, in a way, it's really, I agree, I respect the ballsiness of getting to that ending where it's like, well, Okja can be saved, but like not everybody really can, and there's no real point to any of this, and any sort of like main figures, the only thing they care about is money. So if you happen to have a golden calf idol, in this case a pig, that you can sell them, there's not really any kind of hope. It's something where like I wouldn't mind that sort of ending necessarily as much if maybe the rest of the movie felt like it transitioned as well to that ultimate final point.
We keep saying, and I know that's the point, it's so hard not to disconnect from this movie as you're watching it, just for your own self-preservation. Even if you've never eaten meat in your life, I would imagine it's hard to stay in that space with the movie. At least it was for me. I had to intentionally like distract myself from it to be able to keep going with it. But yeah, I think it's totally valid to say this is a good movie, but this is not a movie for me, or this is not a movie I will ever watch again in my life, or, this is not a movie I will recommend to everyone, because I really don't think that everyone should watch this movie, just, irrespective of its quality. But yeah, I would agree with you that in like The Host, I have not seen Snowpiercer, so I can't speak to, thematic similarities or,
skip Snowpiercer.
Oh, gotcha. Fair enough. But yeah, like it felt organic in The Host. It was still, my experience so far with Bong Joon-ho is movies that end up making me want to lie on the floor for a couple of weeks. And this is obviously no exception. But yeah, ultimately I come down to this is a good movie that I will likely never recommend to anyone and will never watch again. I feel like that was a rambling answer, but I think it's good, but don't watch it is a valid reaction to this movie.
And then you put it on Netflix right there next to the Okja page. It's just Jessica Scott. I liked it, but it's kind of awful to watch.
Yeah, do not watch this movie, Jessica Scott, film credits.
We'll quote him.
Yeah, there you go. That's how I'm going to get Rotten Tomatoes certified.
With that, yes, for sure. I don't know. I think it also has to do with like some of these characters I don't think transition quite as well to that second half, like especially like the scene you're talking about, Adam, the horrible like mating sequence is like we're led into that with like a drunk version of Jake Gyllenhaal's character, who earlier like it's a great satiric idea of like, oh, this guy is so over the top and silly when he's off camera, and then on camera he tries to put on a different persona entirely that gets him all kinds of followers, and then when he's that same guy but in that particular scenario, it just feels, I don't know, it feels kind of like it's just like, so this is a horrible sort of awful thing that happens, and I'm 100% get why it's here story-wise and all this other stuff like we mentioned, but then you have like his character there, and I think it just kind of deflates a lot of the interesting tension that you even have for that sequence. It's just like he's like Alfonso, which is like literally what he says. I don't know. I think like, but earlier on like that really works. Or like I said, Tilda Swinton's different roles. I think we even haven't mentioned. I really love Giancarlo Esposito as the guy basically in the shadows. Is so stunning. Even I think one of the funnier bits in that later half of the movie is the way that he's daintily holding like the weird beef jerky thing that they have at the end. He's just daintily unwrapping it like it's almost a banana.
Yeah, and by the way, again, I'm not eating that fucking shit. There's no way. To get to back to the Jake Gyllenhaal and the thing, yeah, he's drunk and he's having sort of a job crisis where, he's not valuable anymore to their corporation, and sort of they're hoping that Mia becomes the new face of the company and all that stuff and blah, blah, blah. And he does, Alfonso, and all that shit happens. But then he's like, I love animals. And he starts cutting pieces off Okja. What the fuck? Like, it was, again, just so tonally shocking to me, because this guy's sort of been the joke character the whole movie. And then they have him go very dark for like 2 minutes. And then the next time you see him, he's up there drunk and being silly, and someone throws a bottle at his head and all this stuff. It feels like it got so concerned with getting its message across that it sort of lost the characters that it built to sort of start the story. Everybody became a completely different character for the most part in the second act, other than really Okja and Miha. I mean, even Tilda Swinton's two different characters, and Stephen Yeun is part of the group, but yet he's there at the end. And then Paul Dano almost gets beat to death, but they save his life. It's just, they lost their own characters in, like I said, in the sort of attempt to really get a message across about processed meats.
Right. And even with like the ALF characters, I also think like they feel so totally confused, where it's just like, oh, hey, these guys obsessively believe in like 90% of what the Mia and Okja would want, which is to like not have any of these things happen to these animals, but they're also incompetent. It's just kind of saying like, well, organizations don't work, so it's like, so what the fuck am I to do with that, dude? So you want us to not eat this processed meat, but also fuck trying to organize not eat processed meat? Like where are we going with this? It just I don't know, really. I think that's why the ALF stuff really is what kind of makes this satirically fall apart in the second half. Despite, I agree, I think there's still a lot like interesting like directorial flourishes, and I think it does a pretty good job of at least selling like what it wants to do with the two main characters. But a lot of the peripheral stuff just feels like it's kind of like tenuous and thin after a certain point. It's about as thin as like Jake Gyllenhaal's mustache hairs after a certain point. I don't know where exactly it's going.
I will say though, out of all the ALF stuff, Paul Dano was fucking really good in this movie though.
Yeah,
I mean, of course he was, but
yeah, I'm obsessed with Paul Dano. So I was continually shocked at everyone who showed up in this movie.
Yeah, none of the performers really. I think that's what really sells you even into that second part of the movie. Is still, like we mentioned, like Tilda Swinton's playing both those roles and is still like really committing to it. Jake Gyllenhaal, even like when he gets on that fucking stage and he's just doing whatever he's doing, getting up there and having like floppy limbs and stuff. Even like I agree, Stephen Yeun, I think is trying to play that part as interestingly complex as he can. I think Lily Collins is also pretty solid. I think that's the stuff that I think makes this work more than not for me. It's really the commitment of the performers, and even just the world that Joon-ho is designing around here, I think is tremendous. Like the look of the giant inflated like balloon that's going on, or early when we had like the beautiful luscious look at like basically the South Korean forest they're in the middle of in the mountains, all this other stuff. And even like the first shot when Jake Gyllenhaal comes up, and it's basically like a one shot of him like getting the water and all this other stuff, and then we see Okja and he sees it for the first time, is like such a stellar example of like his directorial flourishes. So I think there's enough like bits and pieces to get you through to the end, but at the same time I agree that it doesn't quite work as a cohesive whole. And I think that will be my final thoughts, because we have a whole other movie to talk about, and we should get into that. But Jessica, your final thoughts on Okja?
Honestly, I agree with that. I don't want to. There are a lot of elements that I enjoyed, but overall, frankly, it was just too difficult for me. I feel so foolish saying that, but it was just such a hard watch.
No, I mean, look, like we said, that second, like, once they get particularly to the slaughterhouse, it's very brutal. Like, I don't shoe my nose in anybody that has a hard time with especially the finale of this movie. But Adam, what about you and your final thoughts on Okja?
I would be like kind of worried about people who don't have a problem with this finale. Like we're kind of like, oh fuck yeah, like no. Like, yeah, I think it's a solid movie, man. It's well acted, it's beautiful looking, the effects hold up, everything. It's just there's such a tonal whiplash for me in it. And again, it doesn't make the second half bad. It's just a completely sort of different movie. I don't think I'll ever watch this again. I'd be hard pressed to find someone to recommend it to. And like, just fuck hot dogs. Like, just stop eating hot dogs, people, unless they're kosher.
Yes, that's the ultimate lesson.
There you
Eat
go.
kosher hot dogs. For sure on that. But before we get into our next feature, here's a promo for an ESO so you can queue up right after ours.
Do you know how fast you were going?
Sorry, officer. 1 episode every 2 weeks?
2 weeks.
Did you also know you're carrying a dangerously heavy load?
Yes, sir, we do. We've got interviews, fight nights, film discussions, Desert Island DVDs, and lots more.
I think we've got to take you down to the station. You do not have to write anything, but it may harm the Cosmic Pizza podcast if you do not mention, when questioned, something you later wanted in the promo or feedbacks. Anything you do say may be used in said feedback.
Cosmic Pizza podcast is not about the cosmos, all about pizza.
All right, now let's talk about Constantine.
Mr. Constantine, I'd like to ask you a few questions. I know the circles you travel in, the occult, exorcisms. I thought that you could at least point me in the right direction.
Yeah, okay, sure. What if I told you that God and the devil made a wager for the souls of all mankind? No direct contact with humans, that would be the rule. Just influence. See who would win.
Demons stay in hell, angels in heaven.
They call it the balance.
I need to see what you see.
You do this, there's no turning back. You see them. They see you. Understand? Go to hell.
Alright, so Constantine came out February 18th, 2005, which is based on the DC Comics character of John Constantine, though I think we should firmly just establish right off the bat, Adam, as I know, definitely a very comic book literate person, this is very different from Constantine besides name and vague premise.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, Jessica, you're a fan as well of the comics?
I'm a huge fan of the comics. This is, we'll get into it, but this is not really Constantine, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
Not really.
Yeah.
Right, but this is a film that it stars Keanu Reeves, who is very much the opposite version of who I believe, based on, I don't know much about the comics. Most of what I know is from the brief, short-lived NBC show that starred Matt Ryan, which everyone said, man, Matt Ryan's really good in the show. And that's about all they really said.
Yeah, he was closer to, for sure, to the comic. I mean, let's just put it this way, dude. The original concept for the character in both look and almost personality was based on Sting.
Mm-hmm.
So, It's not Keanu Reeves. You know what I'm saying?
Right, and God help us if he had tried to do another British accent post Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Oh God, could you fucking imagine? Oh, oh, oh! Thank God they didn't try. Oh.
Right, true. But yeah, so this is, it's very different from the original source material, but it's a movie that I remember at the time was criticized a lot for that, and was kind of like very minimally successful and just kind of faded away until it got a weird cult following that I remember, particularly once the DVDs came out and everything. Jessica, this being the first time you've seen it and being a fan of the source material, do you think any of that is maybe warranted, or do you feel like it should have been left in the dust?
Well, unless a movie is, like morally abhorrent, like actively harmful, I'm not really going to advocate for it being left in the dust. If there are people who love this movie, more power to you. I'm glad you love this movie. There were parts of it that I really enjoyed too. To me, I had two main problems with it. The first, sometimes being a comic book purist, I was like, this is not Constantine. Keanu Reeves was horribly miscast. I love Keanu Reeves, but he does not have the irreverence and the kind of, devil may care, fuck you attitude that you need for Constantine. I do think Matt Ryan is really good in the role, but he just doesn't have the swagger required for this character. So, you've got that weird miscast disconnect right from the start. But also, honestly, except for a few bright spots, I found this movie pretty boring. It just feels like attractive people wandering around on a green screen soundstage, not really connecting with each other or with the material. For a movie about, preventing the end of the world, it never felt like the stakes were very big. And that's just such a strange disconnect to me. So, I'm not going to criticize people who love this movie. I'm sure, if I'm looking for something to do on a Saturday afternoon, I might watch it again just because there are some parts that I really liked. I'll certainly watch it again before I watch Okja again. But I had heard over and over again that a lot of people hated this movie. A lot of people thought that this movie was terrible. And I can see why a lot of people don't like it, because it's not the comics Constantine, and it's not, in my opinion, the most entertaining or well done movie, even though there are a lot of good people involved in it.
Yeah, I hadn't seen this either until I ended up picking it here for the show, and I think I do like a lot of elements of it, but I agree the biggest problem, even just as a non-comics person, is one, Keanu just feels, I don't think works even for the Constantine that's written in this particular movie, where it feels like they're kind of trying to slot him into an action star role because this is post-Matrix. And I think the worst parts of the movie are when they try and go sort of Matrix-y action, but it's angels and demons kind of thing. As opposed to when it wants to be like a horror fantasy movie, I think it's at its best. There's a lot of like really fun moments of even when people are like wandering around in hell. I like the idea that hell is sort of this version of Earth that we see is just like covered in like fire and brimstone, and even the demons don't look that bad for 2005 CGI, I would say. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff there, but I think it falls under the weight of having to be like, oh, we're a comic book movie and have Keanu Reeves post the Matrix movies. This is gonna be a badass actioner. It's just like, guys, can we just have like, I don't know, the Tilda Swinton angel or Peter Stormare devil like talk? Because that's the most interesting stuff in the fucking movie, for sure. But Adam, I know you were definitely both a fan of the comics, but also even a bit of a defender of the movie. Am I right?
Well, I'm a defender in the movie in the way that everyone but the main two leads, Keanu Reeves and even Rachel Weisz, who I really like, she just falls flat in this movie, and they have zero sort of chemistry together, I mean, at all. And then, of course, as I forgot until rewatching it, fucking Shia LaBeouf. But to me, everything else in it works. I love Peter Stormare. I love Tilda Swinton. I like Jamin Hansu. I even like Gavin Rossdale in it. There's a lot of cool shit that they could have really done with this anti-Catholicism sort of story, to where this guy who's saved all these people and everything, he's still going to go to hell because of, ultimately he tried to kill himself, or he did kill himself, and blah blah blah. There's a lot of cool shit in this movie. Like, there's a really really good story here, even for a Constantine story. It is, unfortunately, Thomas, I think you said it really well, a post-Matrix Keanu Reeves, to where you can completely tell, i.e. even him being in the black suit instead of, the gray trench coat and the red tie and that, like he's supposed to be, was a choice. There's no question about it. And the bigger action bits do get a little fucking silly. And also, a lot of them are really poorly shot and lit. Like, the whole scene in the hospital, the water gets blessed and everything, you could barely see what's going on. You just see him flipping around that ridiculous-looking shotgun and shooting these things.
It feels like a scene from a lesser Blade movie, in particular that moment.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's a good point, yeah. But there's a lot of interesting stuff in this fucking movie. Like, when he goes into John Mansu's club, and just what the fuck is going on in that club? Like, what are they doing? Like, are they eating somebody? Like, it's crazy cool flashes of really dark shit. It's just, unfortunately, they sort of get you there, but never sort of pull the cord. If this movie would have really went for it and had a lot more dark and disturbing imagery, I think it would have worked a lot better if it leaned on sort of the horror aspect of even the source material, rather than it's a comic book movie, so it's fun and crazy action, because it just comes across kind of flat.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, I think also to reference the Rachel Weisz thing, I agree that it's an issue of like that character has nothing. I think that's the big problem. It's like, it's kind of like one of the big sins that's happened since Rachel Weisz started doing like big blockbuster movies. Like, it happened in The Mummy Returns, happened as recently as Black Widow. Give Rachel Weisz shit to do. She's one of our great actresses, and she's just kind of like, yeah, I'm a cop, and I'm gonna get. There's that one scene where like he faces off against Balthazar, and she's like, oh man, I can't believe he would put me in this car. And it's like, oh man, she's gonna do something. No, she just comes in just like, oh, it's done? Okay, gotta go back in the elevator, and then she gets fucking kidnapped after that point. It's such a, like, dumb cock tease of a thing. Just like, oh man, Rachel Weisz just gets kidnapped. Like, her role is so thankless in this movie. It is so much of just like a damsel getting kidnapped kind of thing. Even when she plays two parts in this movie, the other one is just like, oh, I die so I could get the plot moving.
Yeah, and she's supposed to be this, super cop, but she keeps forgetting that she's psychic. Like, every time the plot requires, and they have to have a powerful psychic to bring the son of Satan back, she's like, but where will they find a psychic? Like, 20 times she asks this. They want us to believe she's, really tough and strong and smart, but at the same time, just the dumbest person on the planet and completely incapable of doing anything. It's bizarre.
It feels very, like, this whole movie with this action stuff and Rachel Weisz, even like we're talking about, it feels so studio note heavy. It feels like there was a really cool vision of this movie that has like sort of horror, fancy, even a bit of noir stuff with, I agree, the Papa Midnight Club has a lot of cool, like, almost noir connotations to it. You could almost do like a Casablanca, but between heaven and hell is what it's kind of trying to be. And then studio guys just like, but it's a comic book movie. We need, like, people blow up, and we need them to have like a cross gun.
There needs to be, a Looney Tunes hole in 25,000 walls, and Keanu just runs through them for an hour.
Right.
Yeah.
That's 100% true.
Give him a cute little buddy who drives a cab and make him really want to be like him. And like, okay. The thing is, it's just, like I said, there's a lot of cool shit in this movie. This is one of those, if it's on, I'll watch it. And I do understand why it's got its fans. There is a really cool mythology that's sort of peeking out from behind the curtain here, the whole movie. And I think a lot of people can sort of like build their own version of the movie in their head as they watch it. Like, oh man, if they would have done this, it'd have been so cool and stuff like that. Like, I get it. And, because I do that with some lesser movies too. I think them pigeonholing themselves into the comic book universe really hurt the movie.
Yeah, I do want to say, like, some of the things I really like. I think it's especially disappointing when I think the movie opens so strong. I love the opening set piece of this movie, where he goes up to the apartment and the one young lady is, like, possessed. I think is actually a stellar way of introducing a lot of, like, the mythology stuff and getting to, like, oh, hey, you gotta, like, put the mirror over, but don't look into their face, and then the one guy, like, ages rapidly. in front of him. So like I think that's really stellar stuff, and I think if it just kind of stuck to doing that kind of like teasing of the mythology in small intimate ways, as opposed to, I agree, Jessica said earlier, the stakes are supposed to be so big of like the Antichrist is going to like come out of Rachel Weisz, basically, is what they're trying to do. It's just like, oh my god, such big implications, and it's like we couldn't really afford the bigger implications, so it's just gonna be in like a hospital.
I mean, it's totally true. I'm just cracking up that we couldn't afford the bigger implications, but it's so accurate though. And I'm with you. I'm really obsessed with that opening with, you know, the demon getting stuck in the mirror, and then like Keanu having to lean back almost parallel to the floor to get it to go through. That's like a thrilling action sequence that still works because it's very horror centric. You know, that's kind of the vibe they should have gone for the whole time. You know, before I had seen this movie, all I knew about it was that most people weren't fans of it, but pretty much everyone agreed that Peter Stormare was an amazing version of the devil. And I'm on that bandwagon. I'm officially obsessed with his depiction of the devil, from, you know, the costume with the tar on his feet and the white suit and the like kind of predatory semi-sexual way he kind of snarls and bites at Constantine. Everything about that depiction I think is a fantastic cinematic depiction of Satan, and not one that's very common. So, you know, there's a lot going for this movie, but it doesn't come together well, partly because of, you know, the woodenness between the leads, miscasting of Keanu, and just, yeah, I never felt like there were any real stakes involved.
I absolutely love Peter Stormare in this too. I love even the no eyebrows, the giggling, and all that stuff. But I'd argue we have seen this version of the devil quite a bit, where someone is so over the top and crazy, and oh, I'm the devil, you know, boogity boogity, I'm wild now. But I'd argue this is probably my favorite version of that type of Satan, because yeah, he does the giggles and he does the growls and stuff like that, but at no time does he come off like a clown. He's still incredibly menacing. And there's even a point when he's talking to John and stuff that you're like, he's not that bad of a devil. He's all right. He's just doing his job. You know, but no, he's really fucking good at it, and I do love the tar on the feet and all that stuff. It's just, and even his introduction with the glass and all, it's just so fucking cool. Like I really, really do dig it too.
I don't ever feel like he is sort of even going for clown as much as he's this like demonic entity that's stuck inside like Stormare body just for the sake of like our human eyes, which I think is what's so fascinating. He's like put on the Stormare suit basically, and he's just walking around just like, this is how I can barely, like, it looks like he's trying to crawl out of his own skin the whole time, which I think is what's so interesting and unsettling about him.
It's right on the cusp where it could go silly, but it's always menacing. Like it's like Pennywise in chapter one, where there's this almost playfulness to it, but it's never not like terrifying.
Yeah, I think it's because like that's the stuff where it almost feels like, man, this should have been more like a Good Omens. Like, with that kind of, like, attention to the idea of, like, oh, this has all been going on this whole time, and there's sort of this weird, almost kind of bureaucracy to, like, the heaven and hell fight that's going on, but at the same time, there's also this chaos. I think there's points where, like, hints at that's so interesting. I think especially with, we should mention, Miss Swinton, the person of the hour playing Gabriel, who I did not know was only in 2 scenes of this movie, and is a bummer because those are 2 of the best scenes of the movie when she shows up, which is like initially her introduction being in front of that fireplace, and the fact that she almost plays like the sort of no specific gender version of Gabriel and is wearing a suit and is just going full like fucking Bowie with the way she just shows up, this androgynous look that at the same time is so captivating to see, and her back and forth with Keanu at that point, and then later on when she shows up with the wings pure on and it's just like stepping on Keanu. It's just like, yeah, this is great. Why wasn't this, especially when like she ends up being like the villain of the movie, I guess?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I love her introduction scene. I love the sort of glow they constantly have in her eyes. I love the way she talks to him in her introduction scene, where she's being really compassionate, but also like, go fuck yourself, basically. And then, yeah, the costuming decisions that they made for her in this movie are fucking incredible. Like you said, the suit. But then at the end, when she's got the wings and she's in sort of the white tank with the white pants, but then both of her arms from almost elbow to wrist are hospital bands, hospital bracelets.
Yes.
Like, it's so fucking cool and bizarre.
We needed more of her. We needed more of Gabriel, and I completely agree on the costuming. Part of me thinks that, that second scene with all the hospital bracelets, she just showed up off the street wearing that. That's her everyday garb, and she was like, "Oh, this might work for this scene." But it's so smart and
It's
so
from her
weird.
personal collection.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. It's from the House of Swinton. I mean, that's just how she shows up to work. That's the perfect way to portray an angel, because she always has kind of this ethereal glow to her anyway. But the androgyny and the kind of sweetness with some sinister, condescension underneath is just perfect for that role. And Gabriel's so fascinating. She makes Gabriel fascinating the way they, set up. I love the idea of angels hating us just as much as demons do. And I like that they kind of lean into that a little bit, that, angels resent humans and really don't care if humans live or die any more than, demons do. And I'm fascinated with, the balance and the push and pull there. And, they didn't seem as interested in that as I think a lot of audience members would be. Certainly I am. But yeah, she's fantastic in this movie. She looks amazing. Yeah, she brings a lot to that character and makes that character interesting in a way that you're like, the whole movie should just be about Gabriel and how many more amazing outfits Gabriel's going to bring out and how many more weird motives we're going to tease out from Gabriel, because there are so many plots in that mind, I'm sure, because of, the angel's kind of apathy or antipathy towards humanity.
Yeah, I think even like with Swinton, my favorite thing about her is that like at the end, after all this has happened and her wings have been destroyed and Gabriel becomes mortal, like Keanu just does like that brief like hit after he's just like, Gabriel's like, you know what, hey, why don't you just shoot me, like go ahead and end my life. And then John hits him and then leaves, and then Gabriel's just like, John, you're doing so well, you didn't actually take the final point. It's such a great example of like what Jessica was talking about in terms of like this weird push and pull of like Gabriel at one point, like mere moments ago, was trying to destroy all of humanity, and then just like easily takes this other point to just be like, oh no, I'm totally on your side, John, now that I have no powers whatsoever. There's this like fun push and pull that like there's so much clever stuff. That's what makes this movie not necessarily a bad movie, but like a frustrating one. It's a really frustrating one to watch because you see so much of like the interesting ideas that are trying to creep out of a very clearly studio mandated like big actioner, which I think comes a lot from the director is Francis Lawrence, who we haven't even talked about, who I think is the king of some of that kind of stuff. With like he also did the Hunger Games sequels and I Am Legend, which I think is the exact same thing of this, where it's just like there's a lot of cool ideas speaking out, but very clearly studio mandated bullshit just keeps getting in the way.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I kept meaning to look up this director because I didn't recognize him by name, but as soon as I heard I Am Legend, I was like, oh God, of course. Because I talk about, again, amazing source material and then a movie that just doesn't get it right at all.
No, yeah. I think there's also like a lot of the same problems with like the way he sort of creates big CGI hordes, I think, in both these movies, that feel like at certain points kind of work and at other points don't, or even like some of the practical effects I think are pretty great. The practical like makeup in particular, like when Balthazar is like melting. I love the look of like his half demon face. It's definitely just a problem of like if there was a more cohesive vision, do you think we could get maybe a more accurate Constantine movie that kind of draws upon these things we're talking about from like a modern DC, or do you think that's less even likely now with the weird push and pull that Warner Brothers has done with some great and some very terrible DC movies as of recent?
For the most part, I trust DC's television universe more than its feature film universe, but even then the TV series are sometimes hit or miss. But I trust television much more than what they're doing in the feature films these days. So I think if they wanted to try Constantine again, I think a series would be the way to go. I would not object to Matt Ryan being Constantine again, because I think he's definitely more Constantine than Keanu Reeves. I'll say that. But yeah, I think TV is the way to go, because I think I'm not caught up on Doom Patrol, but they are nailing Doom Patrol on television. But they've got properties on so many different channels, like there's so many different weird rights issues that some people are getting it right and some people are, in my very humble opinion, not getting it right at all. So, but I would go TV with pretty much every DC property just because I prefer what they're doing on television to what they're doing in films.
I definitely agree. DC, sort of its shining moments are its television work. I mean, all the way back to, Arrow to everything, pretty much everything post Arrow.
Yeah.
Has been, for the most part, a hit. There's been a couple misses, but for the most part, it's at least more solid than some of their film outings. With Constantine, it really depends, man. If it's going to be TV, it's got to be HBO Max type TV where they don't care about going dark and violent and cursing and things like that. Neutered Constantine doesn't really work. Now, I know there's talks of them doing the Justice League Dark movie where Constantine will be a member of it or blah, 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 blah. I don't see sort of Warner Brothers making a faithful film adaptation. I honestly do agree. I think sort of episodic television would be the way to go. Even if you wanted to do it where, there is an over sort of arcing storyline, but they could do almost like a creature of the week feature, demon, whatever you want to call it. It could be done. It could be really successful. I mean, Swamp Thing didn't catch on, but I'd argue if you watch Swamp Thing, it's dark, it's violent, it's disturbing. It should have worked. And the thing is, if you're going to do Constantine, you got to lay into it like they did with Swamp Thing. Because if not, then why make it? It'd be like making a Punisher movie PG or PG-13. That's why it'll never happen. You can't do it successfully. Inherently, the source material is way too dark for the average audience, I'd argue.
Yeah, 100%.
No, I can't wait for Disney Plus's Punisher TV show. It'll be great. It'll be great. But no, I think even with like the Constant, just based on like my limited experience, like this movie and even that TV show, the reason I kind of jumped off that TV show after a couple episodes was like that monster of the week element, I think got so thin really fast because they were trying to make it almost like a Supernatural, like literally Supernatural, the CW show, like ripoff, in a way that just felt like this is like getting a lot more monotonous. I think maybe if we were to do a film for HBO Max, which I know there's been like a lot of like other properties that they're just putting to HBO Max, I think it would find a solid home there. Even like an animated show I think would even work if you were to maybe do it that way, and like so you can get the full amount of scale without having to spend like $150 million or whatever the fuck. I think that might even be a better route forward than quite what they did in like that TV show, or even with this film. I think has like a lot of those similar problems. But why don't we go ahead and go into final thoughts here. Jessica, your final thoughts on the Constantine film?
A lot of potential, some very strange decisions that left this being not a particularly satisfying movie for me, but a lot of good elements, and I can see why it's got its fans, but I also see why it has its detractors. But Swinton is, of course, great in it.
Adam?
There's worse out there, 100%. There's even worse action movies of this era. There's worse movies that deal with this sort of subject matter. It is a heavily flawed movie, but it is anchored by some really, really great performances. Like I named most of them already, but yeah, Tilda Swinton is fucking fantastic in it. Peter Stormare, John Hansu. There's a lot of great work in this movie. It's just sort of messy, but if you're either a comic book movie completionist or you like, horror action movies, then you could go worse than this for sure.
Yeah, I think that's just the frustration of it, is there's a lot of like fun mythology elements and some really good sort of side character performances from, we mentioned like a Stormare and Swinton, but I think also like we kind of glossed over Jimon Hansu, who I think is very fun as Papa Midnight. And even like guy who plays Balthazar, I think is also interesting. There's a lot of fun stuff in here that just is anchored by a giant weight that is like our first three like credited actors, who I don't think are like phoning it in, but also at the same time aren't quite given the right sort of thing. Like we mentioned, Keanu is miscast entirely, even for the version that's written in this movie. Rachel Weisz has nothing to do, her talents are very wasted. And then like the LaBeouf, who I'm glad we didn't talk that much about, but at the same time, that is such like a studio note character of just like, here's a sidekick. The kid wants to join in. And then that stupid post-credit scene of him becoming
Oh
an
my
angel
God.
also is so bad, with very CGI and Shia LaBeouf coming out of the grave, just like so dumb. So bad. That's the thing, is there's this push and pull between something really awesome and then something pretty fucking stupid that doesn't fit with this movie at all. It's a real uneven bag, but I would agree, there's definitely far worse in terms of DC adaptations, in terms of even like post-Matrix kind of like action movies. There's a lot worse that you can do. I would agree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I didn't even know about that post-credit sequence.
Yep.
Yeah. I have a feeling.
Oh,
I was
fuck.
like, I feel like something really dumb is coming.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's just like Keanu visits his grave, just like, I'm sorry, buddy, that you didn't make it. And then he turns around, and then all of a sudden, CG Angel comes up, and he's just like, well, look at that.
Attaboy.
Oh no. Oh, I know what I'm watching after this. Oh, fucking hell.
Oh, yeah.
This movie sucks.
Well, on that note, we're going to go ahead and go into our next segment, but first, here's a brief message from the ESO crew that we fully endorse.
Welcome to Dr. Geek's Laboratory.
Dr. Geek here with another reminder that the ESO network is pro-science and pro-vaccine. We urge you to be a superhero and protect yourself, your family, and your fellow geeks around the world. Don't be fooled by the forces of evil and their anti-science misinformation campaign. Consult the latest CDC guidelines, your doctor, and get the COVID vaccine today.
So now it's time for the Double Redo, where basically every week, along with talking about these two movies related to the topic that we've chosen, Adam, myself, and a guest, if they so choose, can participate in recommending some movies based on the topic and having you steer away from some that we don't necessarily recommend. So I'm going to start here with my choices for Miss Tilda Swinton and her varied filmography. For good, I have two here. Both of these actually were ones I hadn't seen until fairly recently. I have one, her Oscar-winning movie, Michael Clayton, which, if you don't know, is basically mainly following the titular character played by George Clooney, who's like a fixer lawyer who has to keep coming in and like cleaning up messes that happen. And Tilda Swinton plays this woman who is one of the main CEO types of this company that produces this weed killer that, as it turns out, has been giving people cancer. And so Michael was kind of put in to try and be a fixer, to try and get the situation cleared up, along with Tom Wilkinson, who plays like one of the big heavy lawyers that's been around at the firm for several years and ends up having a huge nervous breakdown. And Michael Clayton basically has to like carry him along with like all the other scenarios that are going on all around him. It's a tremendous movie. They got nominated for a bunch of Oscars, and one obviously for Swinton, who is so interesting because she's playing like a literal Karen. Her character is named Karen, and also she looks so deceptively like normal as this like executive type, and it's such a like a role that lacks any kind of ego, much like a lot of her great performances, because she's introduced literally in a bathroom stall with like sweaty armpit stains coming out of her shirt. It is like completely lacking any kind of ego to like introduce her in that way, and then just show that like, oh, despite how like frail she might seem, she is like a monstrous person as things go along with this movie. It's a movie full of great dialogue and great performances, but Swinton, I get why she won for this movie. It's stellar. And speaking of like sort of big ensemble pieces, I'd also recommend A Bigger Splash, which is from Luca Guadagnino, who has worked with Swinton a couple times, and is the story of Swinton plays this David Bowie-style rock star who, at the start of the movie, has ironically gone through surgery and cannot speak that much. But she's often on holiday in Rome with her current lover, and while they're over there, they get a call from her former lover, played by Ralph Fiennes, who's like, hey, I want to come over and surprise you guys, and we'll hang out for the weekend with my daughter, played by Dakota Johnson, his estranged daughter, who he didn't even know about until like a week ago. And it's a tremendous sort of like psychological drama of just like Swinton having to deal with her current lover, who was introduced to her by Ralph Fiennes, and then also her former lover / former manager, played by Ralph Fiennes, where it's just like, it's such a great like 4-character sort of like piece of just these great actors really playing off each other, including, I apologize, I forgot the guy's name, but his name's like Matthias, who plays her current lover, who I've seen in other things, is a really tremendous actor. But it's a really stellar movie of just like these 4 people interacting with each other and all the awkward but fascinating back and forth between them. And then also it's shot in Rome, and it looks fucking gorgeous. And they're on this, like, holiday from hell, that at the same time is like, damn, they're this really cool villa I would love to be at. It's a very interesting, fascinating movie I'd recommend. And then just quickly, my two bad ones that I wouldn't recommend so much are examples where Swinton is very good, but I don't think quite utilized that well in both the Terry Gilliam movie The Zero Theorem, which is one of his more recent efforts that's sort of like attempting to be sci-fi satire in the same way of like 12 Monkeys or Brazil, but is such a bore. And particularly Swinton plays Christoph Waltz, who plays like the main guy's like digital therapist, is the idea. It feels like one of many examples in that movie of just like a very half-baked satiric idea that has no weight to it whatsoever, and it kind of wastes Swinton in like a weird, almost like Dr. Seuss style look with her hair and everything else. It's a very messy, disappointing waste of her. And then the other one I have is The Statement, which is a movie I had never seen before, but is this movie from Norman Jewison, his last film before he retired, the guy who directed like In the Heat of the Night and Jesus Christ Superstar and Moonstruck, one of the great directors of like the 70s and 80s, doing this really bad, quiet drama about Michael Caine playing a French Nazi sympathizer who, one, it's Michael Caine trying to like be a French guy but just being Michael Caine, and it's really dull. And then he's being chased by the chief of police, played by Tilda Swinton, who spends most of her time just in boardrooms, kind of being like, is he here? No, that's where he'd want us to think he is. Maybe he's over in that area of France. And it is a snooze fest that I would not recommend.
I've only seen one of your choices, Zero Theorem. Can confirm. Boring as fuck. Like, I honestly think it took me about 3 tries to get through the fucking thing. And it should be right up my alley. It's Terry Gilliam sci-fi, and plus, sci-fi period. And, woo, that was a rough one. Michael Caine, I'm sort of like dying to see. I can't wait to watch it. And then, until like talking to you off mic, I had never even heard of your other two, but they both sound pretty fascinating. So,
have you seen any of those, Jessica?
I have seen none of those, shamefully. Like I said, I have not seen very many Tilda Swinton movies, which, well done me for coming on a podcast about Tilda Swinton and being like, I've only seen one of her movies ever. But yeah, I haven't seen any of those. They're on my list to see, though obviously I will adjust the urgency based on your recommendations.
True. But Adam, what about your choices?
All right. So for my good choices, they're both in the horror genre, but for the first one, I have the remake of Suspiria that starred like Tilda Swinton, Dakota Johnson, a bunch of other people. Tilda Swinton plays dual roles in it, and she's fucking fantastic in both performances. It's kind of crazy. And I know it was kind of a maligned movie when it came out because it's very different from the original, but it doesn't make it a bad movie. I mean, it's still a solid movie that stands on its own. It looks great. The score is fantastic. The choreography is amazing. The costuming is some of the best I've seen in a long time. And again, it's anchored by amazing performances. I'd argue it's the best, at least my personal favorite, Dakota Johnson performance, and Tilda Swinton just shines in it 100%. You get why people would be so like enamored to want to impress her and things like that. Like, she's just wonderful in it. And then my other one is the Jarmusch Only Lovers Left Alive, with Tilda Swinton, Tom Hiddleston, name it, they show up in this. There's quite a few big actors in this movie. It's this really dark sort of punk rock vampire movie, and she and Tom Hiddleston are just oozing chemistry together in it, and she is wonderful in it. She is so fucking good. I can't say enough about this movie. I love the way it looks. I love the way it feels. I love how dirty and yet glamorous it all is. It's just a wonderful vampire movie, and just a good character study alone. Even if you take out the fact that they're vampires, it's just would still be a really solid movie, but you'd have to do a lot more explaining with certain elements. But it's still a really good movie. And then for my bad, these were hard, only because she is good in pretty much everything. But for one of them, I have the aforementioned first Narnia movie that we talked about. And I don't put any of the blame on her at all. I just think That's one of those like fantasy epic movies that came out at the time and it was so well praised and loved and everyone thought it was awesome. Hell, I even think I liked it when it came out, and it is definitely also one of those that does not hold up at all. The for the majority of the CGI is abysmal looking. It's a rough movie, and I understand it's based on a book, but it's way too long too. But she is really good in it. I can't stand the movie. And then my other one, which features an unrecognizable Tilda Swinton, is the Amy Schumer train wreck. Now, I do think there's a lot of funny bits to this movie still. Some of it is problematic, but for the most part, it's still kind of funny. It's also a little too long. Nothing to do with sort of the controversy about her as a stand-up comedian or anything like that. I just find Amy Schumer kind of a really unlikable lead. And even when she has her sort of switch moment, I just don't. I'm so kind of checked out on her character, and I don't believe it. But still, Tilda Swinton, I wouldn't have known it was her unless I looked it up. She's so unrecognizable and really funny in it. It's one of her major sort of comedic performances that I can think of, and she really goes for it and sells it 100%.
An overlong Judd Apatow movie, Adam. How dare you?
I know.
Never.
Especially off the back of Funny People. Who would have ever thought he'd make a long, blown-out, winded movie?
I mean, I remember liking Trainwreck last time I saw it. I still think that movie's pretty fun. I like the idea that Schumer at least kind of like really dove into like, hey, I'm going to make basically a Judd Apatow movie that like you all guys like because like there's a unlikable lead, but he's like a funny guy, and I'm gonna do that, putting myself in that particular stance. I think there's a lot of interesting elements to that movie. I don't know if it's my favorite. I would say like it's 1,000 times better than like him doing an even worse version of that with like King of Staten Island right after. That's a movie where it's just like, what the fuck even is this? And it was with like Pete Davidson, I think a much more annoying choice. I recently rewatched Narnia for this episode, honestly, because it's like it'd been years, and that's like the prime example of a weird like point where studios were trying so hard to be like, we did new Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings. That was like one of the first attempts at doing that, and it's one of those series that like weirdly has 3 movies, but they're so like completely forgettable. Like that as a series, it just completely disappeared off the face of the earth, with a lot of good reason. Even though Swinton's pretty fun, even when like she randomly appears as like a ghost in the sequel, she's like, I'm still kind of here, bye. but yeah, and also some of the worst green screen that feels like was this shot on like a fucking Weather Channel set and it's chroma keyed. It looks so bad with some of like that background stuff. It's like horrific. But I also really agree with like your 2 good choices though. Suspiria I think is incredible. I think even Tilda Swinton technically plays 3 roles in that movie by like the ending. I won't quite spoil what necessarily happens, but I think she has 3 different sort of unrecognizable turns, including the one where it's like she plays a male character, and it's astonishing. The only tell is just that like, oh, it's Tilda Swinton's voice. Like, you can so tell it's like this is a completely different register from like the old man incredible makeup that's there. But I think even it being so different from the original is its biggest strength. Like I don't get where like if it was too close, people would be damning it the same way. Like, it's a damn if you do, damn if you don't thing. I vastly prefer just doing a completely different thing with the premise, honestly, for any remake. And of course, Only Lovers Left Alive. It's like him, Tilda Swinton and fucking Tom Hiddleston are vampires have lived forever and are, like, really fucking cool. It's perfect. Perfect casting.
I think you're totally right about Suspiria. If they had done anything even trying to be like the original, it would have fallen flat, like, on its face. It would have been a total failure, I think, for everyone. I will admit, as I'm a huge fan of the original, the first time I watched the new Suspiria, I hated it. But I realized I wasn't giving it a fair shake, so I rewatched it. I still don't love it, but I think it's very interesting, and I feel like it's something I have to keep watching to get the original out of my system, so I'm not comparing them at all. But I agree completely, you understand why people are drawn to her even without witchcraft involved. Like, this is a very charismatic person. The dance is amazing. The costumes are amazing. They're doing something so different from the original. I think that's the only way to go with remakes. And I really appreciate the ambition and the wisdom not to try to just recreate what Argento did. So it's I feel like it's a good movie that I haven't made up my mind whether I like it or not, but I just need to keep revisiting it until I can completely exorcise Argento from my system and just watch the 2018 Suspiria on its own merits.
Yeah, because that original's always there. You can always revisit that original.
Yeah, exactly.
But I know you have a few choices, Jessica, but I believe you only have one of each, correct?
Yes, yeah. And I don't have a good and a bad, I have a good and a question mark. Which, I have yet to see a movie with Tilda Swinton in it that I think is bad, just one that I'm conflicted about, which I don't know if that says anything about her in particular, or just that I rarely see a movie that I say, oh God, that was trash. I usually am like, well, I've got mixed feelings about it. But my good example is Burn After Reading, written and directed by the Coen brothers. It's a spy farce, a look at the CIA, an intelligence comedy with no intelligence, I think was the tagline, something like that, where Tilda Swinton plays the wife of a CIA analyst played by John Malkovich. She's having an affair with George Clooney, who is a U.S. Marshal, and they get involved into this bizarre faux conspiracy with some gym employees played by Frances McDormand and Brad Pitt, and it is wildly hilarious to me. I know it's not the most well-received Coen Brothers movie. It's one that I really love. I think it's very funny and very smart, and I enjoy how bitter and cynical it is. I think, some of the reviews that kind of turn people off, but I'm like, why are you watching a Coen Brothers movie and you're surprised by misanthropy? I think it's smarter than a lot of people give it credit for. It's not the smartest movie ever made, but I think it's smarter than people give it credit for, and I think it's very, very funny, and I'm a big fan of just really cynical farces. I think there needs to be a bit more of that in comedies, a little bit more of that cynicism, so I'm a big fan of this movie. My question mark film is The Dead Don't Die, another Jim Jarmusch movie. It's a zombie comedy, basically. It's this very laid-back small town where zombies start attacking. Obviously, a lot of meta humor, an amazing cast. Tilda Swinton plays a Scottish funeral director who has a katana and goes around beheading zombies, and likes to do the makeup on the dead bodies at her funeral parlor in like really bold neon colors, and that's basically it. I do not know what I think of this movie. There were parts of it that I really loved, but I don't know if it came together for me in the end. So I'm not prepared at all to call it bad. So I'm just going to put question mark. Have either of you seen it? Tell me if I'm totally off base and this belongs in the good column and I just don't appreciate fine cinema.
I've seen it, and I mean, I liked it. I would say I have similar sort of frustrating mixed things. I think the stuff with like Adam Driver and Bill Murray as like the two town cops, I think is incredible. Mm-hmm. I think that's like there's so much fun, like dry delivered, particularly from Adam Driver. I think it's stellar. But I agree that like a lot of the other stuff, it does feel kind of aimless in a way that doesn't quite work as well as like Jarmusch can do aimless, and that's what works about like an Only Lovers Left Alive, or we've talked about Ghost Dog on this show, where like there's a laid back sensibility. But at the same time, I think it's because there's so many different characters and just disparate points that it just doesn't quite come together. I agree. I can see why. Like, it was very divisive when it came out. I totally get why it was. I have conflicting feelings about a movie where, like, Iggy Pop plays a fucking zombie. This should be my favorite fucking movie ever, and it's not quite. At the same time, I get the question mark angle of it completely.
Yeah, Iggy Pop is a zombie. Tilda Swinton is a Scottish punk funeral director with a sword. This should be the greatest movie ever made, and yet I just wasn't interested. And it's not that I don't like Jarmusch's speed, because Ghost Dog, fucking incredible, but it just, for this particular movie, it just didn't come together for me.
I haven't seen it yet. I've been meaning to. It's just kind of one of those that I've heard such mixed things on that I've never really sought it out. So, I mean, it's if I can't find anything else, I'll put it on. I mean, I got to see it. I think I've seen everything Jarmusch has done, and plus the cast is just so insane. So I'm curious if I personally don't think it works, what the fuck happened? Like, you know what I mean? But we've talked about Burn After Reading in this exact segment. We're both, at least, I think I could speak for Thomas when I say that we're both big fans of that movie and think it's probably the most underrated of the Coen Brothers films.
Yes, yeah.
How dare you put my own words in my mouth? How dare you? But no, we've talked. I think you recommended like a few episodes ago for when we did 2008, Adam, as one of your redo choices. Right. I am completely on board with that. Yeah, I think especially like Swinton is so perfectly foul-mouthed in that movie, and how she puts down both Clooney and John Malkovich is so funny, especially Malkovich with his huge ego. Every time she just cuts him to the quick, and he's just like, oh, I can't handle this. I'm so frustrated with this. It's really fun to see. I think I agree. In a movie with plenty of scene-stealer performances, she also really sticks out, especially as like the one who's like the most calm and collected person. She's like the only person who's like a complete fuck up in that movie, I think. And she's a great sort of like straight person to lead off of, but also just very funny. But yeah, so those are our choices. We definitely recommend you all submit your own to us. You can do that over on our email and social media that we'll reference here in a bit. But first, we want to thank some people, like Chris Oliver for the intro and outro music used in our show. Listen to more of his music at chrisoliver.bandcamp.com. Thanks to Christian Thor Lally for our artwork. Follow him at Night of Water. That's Night with a K _ water for all his great stuff. You can find his link tree if you follow him on Twitter over there. And also thanks to our Patreon subscribers. As we mentioned, you all patrons, edgelord patrons as we call you, voted for this particular episode topic. You get to vote on stuff like that or individual movies we cover. And also listen to bonus podcasts that we record. And it's all for just $1 a month to help us keep the lights on. And this week that we're going to put this out, there'll be another poll for you to pick the director we do for October. We love doing horror-themed stuff. And so you all get to pick between two horror directors that we could potentially do a topic on, either Wes Craven, creator of Scream and Nightmare on Elm Street, or David Lynch, the guy behind, like Mulholland Drive and Blue Velvet, both interesting directors. I know, Jessica, you're a pretty big horror fan. Where would you lie? Which one do you slightly prefer, if any?
Honestly, I would vote for Lynch. I no disrespect to Wes Craven because I love Wes Craven, but between the two of them, I would vote for Lynch, personally speaking.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing is the Lynch would be, I think, a very fascinating episode to do. But I will also say Craven also works for our show because he has such a fascinatingly mixed filmography, where you have like Scream and Nightmare on Elm Street, but also like Deadly Friend and some of these other ones that are just like bizarrely bad in a fascinating
You make an excellent point, actually. It might be easier to talk about Wes Craven, perhaps.
That's true, because at the same time, Lynch has a couple of ones I might consider bad. But at the same time, either one would be very fascinating to devote an episode to. I'm very curious where you all will lie on that. But we also want to thank someone very special, our guest, Jessica. Thank you for coming on the show. Please plug yourself. Where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me on Twitter at We Who Walk Here. I share my writing and all my silly horror and other movie thoughts. But yeah, come say hi to me at We Who Walk Here. Talk to me about Tilda Swinton's fashion sense. And thank you so very much for having me on the show.
Oh, anytime. And like I said earlier, great cosplays. Particularly you reposted the Elvira one. That was a lot of fun. You have all sorts of interesting ones. And yeah, of course, over at film-cred.com. I've been working with you over there, and you've been a great content editor, especially in the most recent months when you've really gotten to play that part. You're a very receptive and a respectful writer that I like working with quite a bit.
Oh, thank you so much.
But you can find us and our Rinky Dink operation on Twitter and Facebook at DEDBpod, where we, just share all sorts of stuff about any particular episode we do. And also submit feedback to us, doubleedgeddouble@gmail.com, all spelled out. If you can't help us with the Patreon, that's fine. We recommend you at least help us out by buying some merchandise with our logo on it over at the ESO Public store. You can buy like a t-shirt or a mug, laptop case, all sorts of stuff. That helps us out. We get a bit of a kickback from that. So it'd be really helpful if they did what, Adam?
Buy our merch. Buy our merch.
Perfect. Works perfect every time. We force them to do that every week. It's so enjoyable.
Never gets
old, never gets on his nerves in particular. But for more of my own individual antics, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd as @TheWho'sTommy. And I also do some writing at both my personal blog, marianithomas.wordpress.com, and the previously mentioned film-cred.com.
And you can find me on Instagram or Twitter at atom_or_Adam. That's ATOM_OR_ADAM. And you can also find me on Letterboxd at Schwanson. That's SCHWANDTSON. I will not explain what that name means.
Leave it a mystery. That's how it works. And, it would really help out also if you like the show to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and other podcasting platforms. If you're listening on ESO, why not listen to all the other great shows on the network? You can also dig into our archives on our Podbean main feed for even a bunch of episodes we did before we joined ESO. And nothing else if you can't. Support us on the Patreon. If you can't buy the merchandise, the absolutely free way to help us out is to rate, review, or share the show around. That gets us more visibility.
I don't understand why we got to keep having this conversation with you fucking people. It is the easiest thing to do. You hit a fucking button and you do it. It's like pretend you're having one of your microwave burritos or whatever the fuck. Just hit the button and share it. It's not hard. You know what? I'm done. I'm over it.
You sound like you are. You sound like completely over it on every level. It really helps to yell at the audience to get them to do something.
Apparently.
It's the only way they'll
We
listen.
have to.
That's true.
Apparently we have to. The lack of shares shows that.
Well, Adam, it's time we did what we do at the end of every episode, which is pick our choices for next week. This is something we always do where Adam and I each have either two good or two bad choices. We switch up on the quality every week for next week's episode. We've assigned them between 1 and 10 for each of our choices. So Adam's 2 choices he's done that for. He has the 2 bad for this topic. I've done the same for my 2 good. And usually either us or the guest, if we have a guest, picks them between 1 and 10, and whichever of the choices we have that gets closest to ends up being our pick. Though keep in mind, we also do have something called the Godfather rule, where in our back pockets, Adam and I each have a veto, where we can hear either a good or bad choice, and then say, actually, I'll take the cannoli for this particular choice. So we will completely strike that one from the record. We have to go with whatever other choice is there. We can only do that once from now until our anniversary in May. So it's in our back pocket, as it were. So the topic, by the way, that we're doing is interesting. We were doing a bit early because in October we like doing horror stuff. But as of this recording, a James Bond movie may or may not be coming out on October 8th. We're still kind of up in the air, but either way, we're doing a James Bond episode, one that because of the pandemic has been in limbo for several months. But we're finally doing it, and we're finally going to do a James Bond episode, whether or not No Time to Die comes out a couple weeks after that.
Yeah, we can't keep changing the fucking, schedule around, for God's sakes.
No. Are you a Bond fan at all, Jessica?
I am, yes. So I'm excited about this one.
All right. Well, you get to do the picking for our choices. So please pick a number between 1 and 10 for my 2 good ones.
Well, it's James Bond. I'll go with 7.
Of course. Very astute. Number 7. I have a choice here that I think got maligned a lot at the time, but I think has a lot of fans now. I think mainly because this is the only one and done Bond. For Mr. George Lazenby, I have On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Man, it's been forever since I've seen that. I've seen the George Lazenby documentary recently, but I haven't seen that movie in forever. But I remember being quite, sort of positive on it. So I am not taking the cannoli.
Okay. Are you a fan of that one in particular, Jessica?
That is one of the few I have not seen, so I'll have to watch it to prepare for the episode.
Interesting, yes. Though on the other side of things, over at number 2, I had another one, the first of 2 times Martin Campbell kind of rebooted the franchise in a very effective way. I have 1995's GoldenEye, the first Pierce Brosnan one.
Yeah, maybe one of the best Bond themes, too.
Yeah, I think a stellar one. But now, Jessica, for Adam's 2 bad choices, a number between 1 and 10.
4.
Okie dokie. At number 3, I have the final appearance of which some people still think is the greatest Bond that there's been on screen. I have the early 1980s Never Say Never Again.
Ooh.
Yeah.
The second time that Connor was like, well, actually, it's technically the third time Connor was like, nope, I quit. It's just like the third time's the charm, I guess, because he finally quit after that. That's a really bad one. I'm very tempted because I don't even like Thunderball, which is a remake of that much. But you know what? I'm not going to take the cannoli. I think it's a solid choice for the bads on that. Would you maybe agree with that, Jessica?
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with that, yeah.
Yes. But what was your other choice, Adam?
The other one at number 9 is the infamous, potentially the worst one of this Bond, the Roger Moore Moonraker.
Oof. Another bad one.
I was going for the jugular.
Yeah, those are both bottom of the barrel. I'm curious, but yeah. So that'll be interesting. We'll be talking about Never Say Never Again and On Her Majesty's Secret Service, 2 of the longer titles for a Bond movie, for sure. But on that note, everybody, it's time that we ended the show. And please, as we said previously, eat kosher hot dogs.
Yeah, get like grass-fed beef, organic stuff. If you're gonna eat meat, get the good stuff. Fucking killing Okjas.
Don't kill our beautiful super pigs.
Please don't.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping for the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.